Hello and welcome. This is Teresa Litchfield, and today I want to share a couple of watercolor backgrounds that really add to your project and make your focal image stand out. Today is the release of Altenew's Craft a Flower Morning Glory, and to celebrate that, Altenew is having a fun blog hop with giveaway prizes, and it starts on their card blog. I decided to make the background for the flowers look as if it was out of focus or blurred, like you would on the setting on a macro setting on a camera, or on my iPhone I can do that in a portrait setting. I found this image and really loved the flowers and wanted to replicate the look of them. So here's the new Craft a Flower Morning Glory set. And I love these die sets. I just really love die cutting. I love that they put the leaves on one plate in this set also. They've been doing that lately. And on the bottom there is the layering guide. I always keep my packaging inside my storage sleeve just so I can keep it handy. I cut all the dies out of white watercolor paper from the 9x12 watercolor paper pad. And I've just laid them out in their layering according to the guide. I also love to use my tweezers when I'm doing these little intricate things. And here's the paper. I'm going to make a slimline card that is 8 5/8 by 3 5/8. And I'm going to use some watercolor brush markers to paint these. I grabbed some inks that coordinate with my brush markers. And I'll use the Persian blue, which is the color I use a lot on this. I'm going to start off creating the background, and I'm going to put a wash of water all over it with a large watercolor brush. And then I've got turquoise and Persian blue, and I've added water to those marker colors. And I'm just placing those on the back, and I want them to blend together. I'm also using a medium watercolor brush from Altenew and using the water in the reservoir when I need it. I dried that with my heat tool, and now I'm going to do that again and layer the color on top of it. And I added Desert Night to the mix this time, and you can see that really just gives a punch of color. By just adding some water and getting that to blend, it really turns out nice. I really like how that gave it some depth of color, and now I'm going to heat set that again. So for the leaves on the background, I'm going to use those negative die cut pieces that I cut the die cuts from, and I'm going to use those to watercolor. So these pieces become my stencil in a way to watercolor, and I'm going to use lime and sweet leaf from the watercolor brush markers, and I use the lime first, and I've watered those down. The brush markers really have an intense color, so depending on how much color you want, add more water to it. I'm adding the color straight from the marker onto my palette and add water to it, and that way I get a softer look. If I want a more intense look, I'll add it right from the marker. So now this is the sweet leaf, and I'm going to just drop it in a little bit of color on top of that lime, just to give a variation of green. This is the negative from the die that is the base of the leaf, and the other one is the detail layer. So I'm going to add color all across my panel with this, and I'm going to take it off and I turn it just to give a little difference of direction of the leaves. So now that I have that all done with the base of the leaf, I'm going to use the negative from the detail leaf, and I'm going to use just green. So then I'll end up having the 3 colors on there. So the just green is the darker of the 3. And I just randomly kind of pick a leaf that needs something more on it. And I'm not really sticking with what the layering guide says. I'm even using some of those little detail pieces just to add some interest. To finish off the background, I'm going to take the greens left on my palette and I'll just flick on some paint splatters. While that's drying, I'm going to start on the flowers, and here's the base of the flower, and I'm going to use Caribbean Sky and a little blending brush. I thought I would start out inking with the stamp pad just to give a softer look, and that'll give me kind of my placement where I want these little marks to be. They look kind of like a star if you're looking at the top view of the flower, and from the side view is more like a V. You'll see as I keep putting color on these, they really do come together as you layer them up. So for the second layer, I layered them and decided where that blue detail needed to be. You could cut these out of plain colored cardstock. I just wanted this fun, dreamy look with the watercolor background. A couple of the flowers have a third piece, and so again, I lined it up to match the inking on it. And you can see here how I did that. That little piece needed a little bit more on it. Now I can glue all the layers together, and I really thought they turned out pretty. I'm going to take the negative pieces that I used for the background to watercolor, and I'm going to pop in the die cuts now, and I'm going to watercolor those for the front of the card. I start out with lime again, so I put that on my palette. So lime, sweet leaf, and then just green. There are some really tiny, delicate pieces for this, and the centers of the flowers I used mango smoothie right from the pen. Down by the base of the flower next to the stem, I need a little bit of a yellow green, so I'm going to use limeade, and then I'll use the mango smoothie in the center of the flower. So the lime is kind of a yellowy green, and I need that to kind of go on the bottom there, right next to where the stems go. And then here's that mango smoothie right in the centers. And that little die cut is going to go over the top of it. I decided to take a little bit of the Persian blue ink from the marker and add my blue on the flower, and just kind of did it in a stippling motion. And then I'm going to take the Versamark pen and the pure white embossing powder and just kind of fade that out a little bit, and it makes it look a little bit more natural. So with the pen, I just take it in kind of a dotted motion. I don't use my anti-static powder tool either, and I just let the powder go wherever it wants. They really come together when you glue all the layers. I just love all the different colors on the leaves, and just that little bit of blue on the flower really makes them stand out. I've laid all my flowers out on the background so I can get my sentiment just right, and I stamped that with the new Versatile Vases 2 stamp set that just came out. And I stamped it with the Desert Night ink, and then clear heat embossed it. I stacked the sentiment with 3 cardstock strips, and I'm just going to lay that across the bottom here. And I've laid my flowers kind of over the top of it. I'll cut the ends of the sentiment strip off, and then I used a lot of foam tape underneath the flowers and some of the leaves for a lot of dimension. And here I'm doing the Laura Bassin and drizzling the flowers. I have to laugh every time she says that. I think it's so funny. So here's one of the ways I like to make a watercolor background. And I have another card I made a few months ago, and I'll link that to the end of this video as well. It also has that unfocused background in it. This next card was made for the Altenew Pin Flower Tulip stamp that came out a couple weeks ago. I didn't have time to make the video when it was released, but fortunately I filmed the making of it, and I had quite a few requests for a video. So it worked out great to make this video to include it. I really love the watercolor paper pad in the 9x12, and it's 140 pound. I'm going to use the 36 watercolor pan set. And here's the Paint a Flower Tulips outline stamp set. You've probably heard me say a few times how much I love tulips. I'm going to stamp that in my Misty with Obsidian Pigment ink. And I stamp it a couple times to get a really good outline. I love this ink, and after I'm done stamping it, I can use crystal clear embossing powder to heat emboss it. I start off the painting with my tulips, and I'm going to just apply a little bit of water to each tulip, one at a time. So I give it a good wash, and then this tulip, I'm going to start with the coral berry. And I just put it at the base of the tulip and pull it up a little bit. I don't add more pigment, I even just add more water. I'll add that darkest color to the base of the flower, and then I'll move on to the next one. And this is the same color as the other one before it. A big key to watercoloring is layering the color and letting each layer dry in between to build up color, especially in areas where natural shade would appear. So now I'll move on to my next tulip, and this color is Autumn Blaze, and it's the darkest color of the orange tulips that I'm going to paint. So I'm doing the same technique with applying the water and then dropping in some color at the base. So now I'll go back to my first tulip, and I'm going to use cotton candy for my lightest color on all the tulips. And I'll just fade that out towards the tip of each one. The cotton candy really works well for both the pink and the orange. So I'll let those dry now, and I'll move on to the little daisies, and I'm coloring those with the Midnight Violet. On the little berries, I start out by painting them with crimson. I'll come in later after they're dry, and I'll paint those with rubellite for some shaded areas. I've come back to the tulips now, and I'm just going to add some color to the darkest areas. And that layering really does make a difference when you let it dry and add more color to it. So now I'm going to start on the leaves, and I'm going to use the evergreen first. And again, start at the base. I like to start dark to light on most things, and then spread that towards the tip. I'm going to use all the greens in this set, evergreen first and then forest glaze. And on some leaves, I'm going to use the frayed leaf and bamboo. This is getting pretty close to where I like it, and I just love that dimension and depth and the difference of colors. I just need to add a little bit of warm sunshine to the center of the daisies. So now for the background. I'm going to use the moon rock, and I'll use a number 6 brush. And I really fill up the belly of the brush with a lot of water and just take color right out of the pan. Moon rock is a really nice warm gray. And I start by just filling in the areas where you can see the background through the floral arrangement. I want it deep enough to be like shade, but I don't want it to be too dark. And then I move to the outside of the arrangement. And I'm just using a stippling motion. So I'm going to do this in a couple layers. And I actually want my first layer to be the lightest. I'll come in with my second one and darken things up. I've left quite a bit of the painting in this, so you can really get an idea of how I created the background. So I'll put some music on and let you watch the process. using the jet black from the set to do some paint splattering, and I'm holding my hand over the top of the florals just to avoid getting too much on them. After this was dry, I cut it down to 4 by 5 1/4 and edited it onto black cardstock and then onto a white card base. For a finishing touch, I used the Fine Frames cover die, and I'm going to use the very outside frame on this, and I used a double-sided adhesive on a silver mirror cardstock. I like to tape my frames together so it comes off the die easier. So I take that outside one, peel off the backing, and I'm going to put it around the edge, and it just really frames it off nicely. That outside frame is really thin, and so I like to use my craft pick to help me situate that and press it down. I really love detail, and sometimes I feel like that can just take something to the next level. I was really happy and proud of how this turned out, and I hope the recipient that I give it to feels the same way. I hope you enjoyed my watercoloring today, and I gave you some good ideas for some watercolor backgrounds. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate all the time you spend with me. I'll put a couple other videos here at the end that you might enjoy as well. Thank you so much again, and I really hope you have a great day and get to do something you love.